everyone, and welcome to today's Speakers for Schools broadcast. Hopefully you're doing okay and the heat isn't getting to you. I know it's a little bit unbearable right now, but stick with us because hopefully you'll enjoy the next 45 minutes. Today's session will include an interview with our speaker before we later move on to a student Q&A. Questions for our speaker can be submitted via the Q&A function, which you'll find just underneath the stream on your screens. And depending what device you're using, you might have to scroll a little bit to see this box. It's open now and it will remain open through the rest of the session, so you can submit as many questions as you like in response to anything that's said today. Do keep a lookout as towards the end of the session, around about 40 or 22, a feedback Q&A will go live, or a feedback poll, I should say, and that's a chance for you to submit any feedback that you have for today's session, and all of our feedback will be shared with today's speaker. Now, if you find yourself to be experiencing any sort of issues, please do let us know via the Q&A box, and one of our moderators will be on hand to help where we can. Now, moving on to the main event, we're very excited for today. We're thinking about the world of publishing, the world of books, and everything that kind of goes into that sort of creative writing, creative thinking career. So everybody, please put your hands together for the guest director of BolgonaBookPlus and former director of the London Book Fair, Jax. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I hope that everyone has finished exams and you're not too hot, and that you're looking forward to some downtime next month. Really nice to be here.
And we're so thankful to have you join us. So hopefully this should be a good sort of hour towards the end of the school day for the young people.
Yes, or you can go home and get cool. Yeah.
All right, to start off then, just so that we can get to know who you are a little bit better and learn a little bit more about you, could you tell us about your career journey and what it is you do now?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I've still got a bit of imposter syndrome, that I kind of rarely say that I've got a career. I keep saying I've just had lots of jobs. But basically, I always liked reading, which I know sounds like a complete cliche, but I read loads and loads and loads when I was at school. I studied French at university, and then I ended up not really knowing what on earth I wanted to do when I left university. I knew I had to work, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I'm afraid I wasn't very imaginative. My mum was a teacher and my dad was a lawyer, and I had a place at teacher training and a place at law school. I kind of knew I didn't really fit either of those things. So I decided, and this is long, because I'm so ancient, it's long before gap years were invented, but I thought that I would do a secretarial course, which was the route to just earning some money, and then save some money and go traveling. In fact, you could say I was inventing the concept of the gap year. So anyhow, I did that, but I was really, really lucky because my first job, and it was a temping job, was at the BBC. And it was in Broadcasting House, which is still there. And it was writing copy for programmes on Radio 3. And I didn't know the first thing about classical music. But anyway, it was a very good experience, copywriting. It was also a really nice job to come into after university, because you were allowed to watch television and have the radio on all day. And it was just exciting. We got free theatre tickets and things like that. Anyway, I decided that I would use that, this growing realization, because I really do just fall from one thing to the other, I think. I just thought I felt right there. And this was way before anybody had defined the media and television and magazines and everything as the creative industries. And now we have an absolute definition for the creative industries, which comprises 16 different creative job streams. So from the BBC, I also knew that I didn't actually want to stay at the BBC because I wasn't interested enough in the medium. I wasn't interested enough in radio or television. And I mean, I'm slightly ashamed to say, but I do tell everyone this because it is absolutely true. It had never occurred to me how books got made, published, anything. I mean, obviously, I thought about the writers and the writing element, and so the creative aspect of it. But it had never really occurred to me that somebody curated these and actually edited them, or and then how on earth did they get to a bookshelf, to a bookstore, etc. So anyhow, this is all very boring, I'm sure, but from the BBC I decided to use that moment to resist becoming a lawyer or anything, and to actually try and get another temping job in what I now knew to be called book publishing. So I did actually get a job, and it was with Blackie Children's Books. And my job was to trail around the office with people's out trays and redistribute post and put it in people's in trays. I wasn't the best at it, I have to say. I got somewhat distracted. But it was a really good experience because my other job was also to look at what they call the slush pile, which is when people have written a book and they send it speculatively. So they haven't been asked to send it. They just send it to various publishers that they think match what they've written. And my job was to look at the slush pile and mostly return it, but sometimes, ask an editor to have a look at something. And then I didn't particularly want to stay in children's publishing. It was the year that a book called Empire of the Sun, which has also been turned into a film and won the Booker Prize. And it was the year that was published. And it was such an exciting campaign and there was so much excitement around the publication of that book. I decided that I wanted to work for the publisher that published it. So as you can see, I'm not desperately strategic. I thought, right, that's what I'm going to do. And so I got myself a job as a junior in the publicity and communications department. And then I worked really, really hard, actually, to be honest, worked really phenomenally hard. And then I was asked to set up their first marketing department because one didn't exist. And then from there, I became marketing director at a big publisher called Simon & Schuster. And then I was eventually, just shortcutting everything, became global comms director at Reader's Digest. And I always wanted to work on, I became very interested in brands and brand building. And if you think about authors, they're all a brand in themselves. And I became very, very interested in that, and hence the job at Reader's Digest. And then I, from there, decided that I wanted to sort of run my own show a bit. So I became a partner in a top 50 PR company that served the arts world, Midas Communications, and I was CEO there. And then the London Book Fair was one of my clients, and they asked me to go and run the London Book Fair. And then I ran the London Book Fair, and now I'm running BolognaBookPlus. So there we are. That's what I'm sorry, probably everyone's asleep by now.
No, it's interesting.
I just wanted to demonstrate that I didn't have a fixed idea. I just took every single thing, every opportunity that came my way. I tried to sort of bridge it to the next one. And that seemed to work okay.
Yeah, and it's nice. You studied French in university, and then you've gone into the world of publishing. It's just interesting that you don't know where life can take you, and no matter what options are going to appear. So
no,
yeah. Our next,
and the French is still handy because you talk to French publishers quite a lot.
Yeah, double languages. No matter what career you're in, I think if you can speak another language, you're always going to get bonus points, aren't you, above others, because you're more useful.
Exactly. And so many more people are deliciously bilingual now, and that's so lucky. It's such a door opener. It's such a skill that I think an awful lot of people probably don't even realize they have.
Yeah, definitely. Our next question then is, talking about love of reading and writing. Lots of young people, really enjoy reading or enjoy writing, creating stories, or, things like that. And you think when you're writing, you think author, but what other kind of surprising behind the scenes jobs exist in publishing that you might not think of when you first think of the industry?
Well, I think a book publisher, if we're going to go down that route, is a business like any other business. So there are an awful lot of people in book publishers who are brilliant at maths, but are also book lovers. So they've decided to pursue a sort of an accounting career, or in publishing. So they might be the chief financial officer. They might be absolutely brilliant at IT. So they run the IT department within a publisher. Selling is also a huge thing. How do books get into shops and how do they get onto Amazon? It's because there's a whole sales department that's doing that. International sales. If you have wanderlust and you like traveling, or you have lots of languages, or not that that's required, but should you be of that sort of frame of mind, then international sales is a really interesting job. Then, of course, you've got, how do you actually, what is the journey of the book? That manuscript arrives on somebody's desk. It's read by the editor, and the editor is the advocate for the book, if you like. The editor wants to buy that book. Very few books are published without an awful lot of teamwork that goes into them, in terms of copy editing, proofreading, editing, as in pruning, reorganizing reorganizing the book, etc. And then, of course, there's, how does the book look? How do you want it to appear? And we're back to that branding thing. So at the moment, obviously, romantasy is a huge thing in publishing. So there's a certain look for that. I was sent this book the other day, which is a thriller. It's called A Neighbour's Guide to Murder. So I think it is definitely a thriller. But I mean, the design of the book. So obviously somebody who is a book designer in the design department has taken a lot of time designing this book and working with the people who are in production, who are buying the print for the book. So there are lots and lots of different roles. And then you can take a book, it's published in English. How does it go around the world and get published in lots of different languages? Well, that's somebody called a rights director, who is dealing with copyright and foreign rights. And copyright is a huge thing in any of the creative industries, and you'll have heard a lot about that in terms of the government and AI and copyright and Google. And so the rights director is a very important person in terms of taking a book and getting it into France, Germany, Korea, China. I'm just back from China, which is a wonderfully exciting market. So you've got a lot of different roles within publishing. It is certainly not all the editor. It's lots and lots of backstage, but really exciting jobs. And then, of course, you've got bookshops. An awful lot of really keen readers love working in bookshops, almost more so. And some of the most successful publishers have, run bookshops or worked in bookshops, because their knowledge of books and authors is absolutely immense. It's a very good temporary job to get, a job in a bookshop. And then, of course, there's the literary agents, and you've heard of film agents and television agents. Well, a literary agent is, as an author, it's your first reader. So if you're lucky enough to have a literary agent taking you on, they are the middle person between you, the author, and me, the publisher. And it's a good bridge. And sometimes those literary agents are the people who have departments who are selling the rights around the world, and sometimes the publisher. takes those. But it's so there are lots of different jobs, and then of course there are the jobs that I did. Sort of running a book fair. I started the Chiswick Book Festival as a hobby in my spare time. I co-founded it with someone else. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of satellite jobs around publishing.
Really interesting to think about all the things that connect to create a product, really.
Mm.
I like this next question sort of leading on while we're thinking in the terms of all the different roles. It can be quite difficult as a young person to figure out, okay, I want to work in the world of publishing. What do I do? So for someone who's really passionate about, books, publishing, that sort of creative writing career, what should they do to try and get their first step? Because it can be quite difficult to get kind of work experience and things like that, particularly for people who don't live in sort of London, where all the big offices are for these publishing companies. What could they start thinking about to kind of make their first steps into a career of publishing?
Well, I think one of the first things is to look at what resources are out there in terms of research tools. And there is a trade body called the Publishers Association. So that's the UKPA, or the UK Publishers Association. And they have a lot of information about getting into publishing and the various different routes. There's also, and actually, I think they still run a scheme that if you're outside London and you're lucky enough to get an internship, or maybe 2 weeks as a runner at a festival or something like that, there's something called Spare Room, where we in publishing make our spare room available for somebody to stay for free. If they, because renting in London is horrible and expensive and difficult to do on a short-term basis. So the Publishers Association is one resource. Another resource is the Booksellers Association, and the two associations work very closely together. Another one is the Independent Publishers Guild, the IPG. They're another trade body. And then, just as a sort of resource to give you some scope of how many publishers there are and literary agents, there's a handbook called the Writers and Artists Handbook that has them all listed. So, but another thing that I think that has only existed in the last 15, 20 years really, is that now, if you're thinking of if you're keen on a career in publishing, or you're keen on, well, either creative writing or actually working behind the scenes in publishing, there are university courses now that you can do. So if you're thinking of going to university, you could look at both Oxford Brookes, City, and UCL all do undergrad and postgrad degrees in publishing, and you can specialize in different elements. I'm full of awe, actually, when I meet those students, because the work they do, the reports they do, the dissertations they do, they're quite incredible. And I mean, all of us in publishing could learn quite a lot by reading those dissertations. So that is another route. I would always say, even if you live remotely, there will be something that you can join online, or there will be, I mean, there are literary festivals everywhere. You can always volunteer to sort of make coffee or take coats in the green room. Because festivals are run on a shoestring, they always need volunteers. And also, I'm always incredibly impressed. We run an intern scheme, and I'm incredibly impressed by the people that we get who have their own blog, or their book talkers, or whatever. And I think that sort of footprint is also, it shows commitment, and is very impressive, actually. It exhausts me just thinking about it. But you guys are also digitally savvy, and so creative and fast, and so good at sharing what you like. So I think those things all really count as well. So, you know, don't be defeated if you live in the middle of a moor. As long as you have internet. Yeah, so there's lots of, and book clubs, there are online book clubs. There's I run a couple of book clubs. Book clubs are, in a way, I sometimes think the fewer people the better, because you get such a good discussion. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. And I don't know if you saw me typing, I wrote down those sorts of trade names, and I'll include those in our feedback email. If you have missed them and you're watching, don't worry, I'll make sure that they're all included in that feedback email. So yeah, really helpful. Our next question, which is sort of leading on then, before we kind of switch to different topics, what key skills do you think is needed for someone working in publishing? I'm thinking, what can the students watching start thinking about? Let's develop this. I know you just talked about things like blogging and things like that. What do you think are the key ones that really helpful when you go to work?
I think it's true of every industry. Your interpersonal skills are immensely important. Um, you know, Even if one is very shy, the fact of the matter is that, whatever field one goes into, making the other person feel comfortable and welcome and wanted is, I think, one of life's biggest skills, really. And I wouldn't say never more so than in publishing, but if you think about creative industries, people are putting their work out there that isn't necessarily formulaic. So, it's not putting an argument for law or putting a set of accounts in that has a right or wrong answer in a way. It's somebody, it's their baby, their creative baby that they're putting out there, and it can make people feel very insecure. Even, you're the editor's taken it, you're going to be published, etc. Oh my God, it never stops them, because then there are the reviews. Will it sell? Yada yada yada. So I think being a sort of steady voice who can cope with reassuring people, and also, you can only really do that if you're very interested in what you're doing. And so I always say that publishing isn't one of the best paid jobs in the world. It obviously fulfills all the minimum requirements, etc. And but it's not like being a banker or anything like that. But what it is, and what it does attract, is people who have a true passion for what they do. And I think that in publishing, we're often very lucky that you sometimes forget you're at work because you enjoy what you're doing so much. And I think that if you don't have that passion, it would be a difficult, well, as with everything, it would be tricky to do it. But you could go into publishing via, for example, the production route, and absolutely hate production. But while you were there, you might see over there somebody's doing something really fascinating with marketing, with social media and marketing, which of course is one role that is hugely important in publishing, and also public relations. Getting authors on television, getting authors, on tours and things like that. Those are so take any entry level job you can, and then have a look and see where you'd want to hop if something appealed. I've forgotten your question. I'm so sorry, Charlie. I forgot the question you asked.
You definitely answered it. It was looking around skills and things to be aware of before you enter the industry. So yeah, definitely. I like that. Also, think of what skills you do, and think of, even if you're not the most creative writer, you don't always have to be. You can still go into publishing in a different role that does appeal to one of your strengths. Yes. So yeah, really good things to talk about. A few more questions then before we move on to our student Q&A. This next one is, how important is publishing, and how important is it to have those different voices, cultures, and perspectives represented in all the books we see or
Well,
read?
first of all, yeah, let's define publishing, because the part of publishing that makes the largest contribution financially to publishing as a creative industry is the academic, scientific, technical, medical, educational publishing. So all of those books that doctors need, midwives need, all of those incredibly important books that actually I think we take for granted, really, but a huge amount, and journal publishing, which is, research, etc. All of these things incredibly, incredibly important. And the accuracy, the role of the editor, the role of the peer reviewer, all of that stuff is so, so important in publishing. And it is, I know everyone, when they think of publishing, they think of creative writing, they think of the books that you see in Waterstones or foils or whatever, or Amazon. But I think you also have to sort of really, really think that there are, if, say you are really interested in chemical engineering and you wanted to read that at university, but also you wanted to combine that with publishing, then there is an academic publisher for you that where people need editors on chemical engineering. So so that academic element is very important, I think, to remember is a large part of publishing. But going on to the more creative writing element part of publishing, I've forgotten the question, Charlie. I'm sorry, because I went off on my little.
The importance of basically representation within
Yes.
within
Yes.
books.
So now then, with it, well, and children's books, hugely important on representation, massively, massively, massively important, but representation across the piece in every aspect of publishing. And when you're talking about trade publishing, which is the publishing for pleasure, if you like, reading for pleasure, it's the Waterstones. So, publishing is a reflection of society. What if you think about trends in publishing, or you think about how a book can set a trend, or if you think about, how controversial a book can be, or things like that, they are reflecting the society we live in. So therefore, it is utterly inconceivable that those who work in publishing are not representative of the demographic and the people of the country that you're operating in. So do I think it's important? I think it's hugely important. Yeah. And I also think it's really, really, really important in terms of children's picture books, that everyone can see themselves within. And that goes across the board. It's everything. It's from disability to urban versus rural or whatever. It's everything. Yeah.
Great, I like that one. Thank you. It definitely is. It's what's popular, what's on trend. All of that shows a little reflection into how we are growing and changing. So yeah, really lovely. I'm going to make this our final question before we move on to our student Q&A, and it's a little bit more of a fun one, hopefully. What is the best and most difficult thing about working in the industry?
I think the best is something I've alluded to already, which is that quite often if you like the creativity, if you like the challenge, if you like creative problem solving, which I think publishing often needs, then that is the best bit. And if you like building things, if you like, certainly from what I've been doing, it's taking a book, for example, and the book is so much more than the plot. The book will be the author. The book will be where the author grew up, what the author does as their day job. It will be it will also be, are there any sort of huge themes in the book that are reflective of society, etc., etc. So, you know, if you're creating something around that, you know, you're taking something and making it so much bigger than the sum of its parts. And that and obviously the flip side of that is when you see lots of potential and it doesn't work because, you know, the stars are against you. That's very miserable. The worst part, I'm not going to lie, it does not pay brilliantly. It's certainly, but we're all in it, I think, because we always refer to publishing as a global village, because it is very much an industry where people are completely connected by a certain shared value and a certain shared passion. The downsides, I would say that there are a huge number of women who work in publishing, but there are still an awful lot of men who are in the top jobs. There are a huge number of women who work in publishing, and some research has just been done on that. Is that because, and also going back to the representation thing, actually the money sort of does matter, because if you've got a degree and you're passionate about publishing, but you're also really brilliant at accountancy, are you going to go into publishing that pays less, or are you going to go into something more blue chip? So those are things that I think as an industry we need to grapple with. But of course, you know, one of the hugely exciting things as well is to how, if you publish a book, it travels across media. So I always use Lord of the Rings as an example. You know, it started as a hardback book because paperbacks, I don't think, existed when The Hobbit was first published. Then it became a paperback. Then, goodness gracious me, but you know, it became an ebook. Oh my God! It became a film. It became a game. It became, you know, it's got this massive franchise of, and that all started with a book that was printed. And
as many stories do.
yes, but it's just, and that's the exciting thing. So when you're talking about brands and when you're talking about how a book is often so much more than a book.
Love it. I like that's the way we're ending the sort of formal Q&A, moving on to our student questions. Definitely a nice way to sort of wrap up that. So I'm going to dive straight in and we'll get as many of these asked before we have to wrap up the session. So we have a question that's come from, I hope I say this right, Colston Sixth Form College. And they've asked, how can you determine if your work will be well received and if others will comprehend what you've created? So really interesting. I think they may be a writer, and that might go back to your sleushing days. Was that what you called it?
The slush pile. Well, of course, and the other thing that we didn't touch upon is self-publishing and the rise of self-publishing, and which in a way is the democratization of publishing, because anyone, you know, you don't have to have that intermediary as the publisher anymore. If you feel very passionately and you feel as though you can actually find a market for your book, you can self-publish it. I think that an awful lot of writers, and of course I don't speak as a writer, but I do speak to writers a lot, and I think a huge number of writers are part of online you know, Facebook groups. So it does seem to gravitate towards Facebook. But, you know, there's a huge online sort of community of support for certainly very different, you know, for different genres. So science fiction or fantasy or romantasy or romance or erotic fiction or whatever. You know, all of these things have their own sort of groups, and writers all sharing work with each other and saying, and then getting feedback. So I think that probably is the first thing that people do is to find their tribe, if you like, their neighborhood. Yeah. Of
Yeah, and I know that many people that are published start off obviously with the rise of book talk.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
a lot of people start off sort of self-publishing, and then they get picked up because it
Yes.
starts growing, because they can't handle it anymore. So then publishers come in and sort of help them spread it across countries and so forth. So it can, that sort of self-publishing is, could always be a good place to start if you find people that are your peers.
It's sort of is like the slush pile as well now, you know, but people can get out there and yeah. But I think writers asking each other for feedback on their books is what happens quite a lot. Yeah.
Great. This next question then comes from Barton Perival Sixth Form College, and they've asked, do you think having inner connections within the publishing world truly helps? And if so, what can we do to gain more experience with publishing? I think there's sort of I don't know if it's stereotypical, but there's this sort of idea that you can only get into publishing if you know someone who's already in publishing. Is that true? And obviously,
Well,
they want to know how to get
it used
experience.
to
You've touched
be.
on that a little bit
It
already.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very valid question because it is a stereotype. And certainly, if you remember right at the beginning, I said I had never thought about how books were made, how books were published, etc., which showed a decided gormlessness on my part. But and I didn't actually. I'd spent all my time reading classics rather than the contemporary novel, and when I was incredibly lucky to get the job that I got, especially in the publisher that the Empire of the Sun publisher, Victor Gollancz, because I was interviewed by the founder's daughter. So it was the last it was very much a last independent publisher, etc. But I was only the second non-Oxbridge and non-connected person to work there. Everyone else, their tutor at Oxford or Cambridge had, gotten their jobs. That is not the case anymore at all. Not at all. So the reason I tell you that is to show the contrast, and I want everyone to take this away. We are not allowed to do internships for friends' kids anymore. There is a process. You apply. All the publishers have clarity on their website, clear instructions on their website as to how to get some experience. And I think that your covering letter is really important. And if you have demonstrated that you love, that you've volunteered and things before, that can only be helpful. But formal internship schemes and holiday schemes exist, and people follow them. So if that's helpful.
It is. That sort of, knowing that they're going out there, looking, and a little bit of assurance that it's not who you know, because that could always be a scary thing. So yeah, definitely. I think we have time maybe for one more
and
question.
Also, don't forget.
Carry on.
I was also going to say, don't forget that when you're applying for experience, when I was running Midas public relations, we had an internship scheme there. Now, that wasn't a publisher, but you were working on books and you were working with authors. And by extension, you were working with publishers. So consider lots of different things as work experience, literary agents as well, maybe a printer. There are lots of different ways of gaining access and experience.
Yeah, I love that, because everybody will think of publishing, but try and think of those other roles, and less people might be thinking of those. Yeah, it's always going to be a tough, there's always going to be lots of people going for the same couple of roles within all of the publishing companies. So that's a good bit of advice there. And our final sort of question as we look before we're closing the session then is, someone's asked, what are your thoughts on e-readers and e-books?
Well, I love them actually. So when I was running the London Book Fair, I cannot tell you how many debates we used to have. We used to have to give, a platform to everyone saying, oh my God, ebooks, they're going to be the end of the book, blah, blah, blah. And, they're going to replace physical books, etc., etc. But in actual fact, it's just like everything else. I always draw the parallel between, do you want to go into a shop and try on the trousers, or do you want to get them to your home and try them on in the comfort of your own home? You have a choice, and an ebook is a choice. So I know that when I've got this with me, I'm never without a book. So I find that a huge comfort, especially as I travel a lot for work. So I'm absolutely delighted that I don't need to lug around 7 or 8 books for a trip anymore, because the ebook exists. They're also much better than they used to be. They're designed properly rather than just scanned from, rather than being old PDFs or whatever. And in actual fact, all the doom mongering did not come to pass. They, market researchers and people always refer to this as the tipping point. And in actual fact, 50% people read 50% ebooks and 50% paperbacks, hardbacks. And I think what the ebook has done is to give everyone a different convenience, if that's what they want. E-readers, I don't have a separate e-reader, but I know loads of people who do, who like to keep their ebooks separate from their work or everything else, or admin. I just read on the Kindle app. And so as you can tell, I think they're a good thing. I also think the rise of audiobooks, which has been phenomenal, is also a great thing. I think we just need to find a verb that works because you actually do not read an audiobook. You listen to an audiobook, but you are familiar with that book. I think audiobooks are a fabulous, inclusive, wonderful, accessible way of getting people to enjoy stories, knowledge, education, whatever. As long as people aren't denied the pure pleasure of books and the content of books, I genuinely don't mind how people get hold of them.
I love that. I love that. That's a really nice thing to think about. And again, there is so much sort of around it that it's lovely to sort of go, do you know what? This is someone who's been in publishing for many years and they say it's a good thing. So it's lovely to hear that. I will say a feedback poll should be going live round about now. So if you can give us a couple minutes to give us some feedback as we are wrapping up the session, that'd be wonderful. And before we go today then, Jax, could you give us some final thoughts and feelings on kind of today's session and anything you'd like to share with us as we close the session down?
I think my thoughts are lots and lots and lots of luck for whatever you choose to do, and how wonderful it is that you guys were interested enough to tune in, and that publishing is still something that people might want to do. It's an important industry because it's that reflection of society. It can also be controversial. It can get people to think. A book can touch you in a way that a book can stay with you for days. And I was listening to somebody the other day who was leaving the industry. He was retiring, and he said that he started off leaving school and he was selling fruit and veg on a market stall, and he read Joseph Conrad, and that book changed his life. And then he discovered books. And if you discover a book that really changes your life, I think we all owe books a big debt of gratitude. But anyhow, lots of luck. Enjoy your summers, and thank you very much. And don't melt.
We're definitely all trying not to. Brilliant. Thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful, wonderful having you on. A truly great session. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Hopefully, you've enjoyed today's session. And as Jack said, you haven't melted while watching this. We are aware it's incredibly hot, but hopefully, you're going to enjoy the rest of your evening cooling down. That's it from us today. do send that feedback. And if not, an email will come shortly along with the recording and a list of all those resources that Jax mentioned earlier. So keep an eye out for that one. That's it from us for now, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.